as far as like other areas, and we touched on it briefly, Australia, I don't know if the Kevin Rudd government is being seen as some sort of saviour or something. It feels like we've completely, missed any recession in the slightest. I think spending still seems like it's up. People seem confident. I haven't really heard of foreclosures or anything going. In fact, the property in Australia
is going through the roof. I know.
Yeah,
I know. I think the average price in Australia, is 460,000 compared to 160, 170,000 in the US. Yeah. When I looked at bubbles forming in property, and that was an interesting one. I looked at Japan first and went, hang on. Japan's bubble was interesting. I think commercial property dropped about 83% of value, and residential by about 60% of value. Mm-hmm. And even the Nikkei, whose anniversary was, I think, the 28th or 29th of December, their 20-year anniversary, they're still down something like 66, 70% from where they were 20 years ago. Mm. And so they had, when you talk bubbles, you think, wow, that's huge. But then I looked at the US housing bubble, and they were bigger in magnitude than the Japanese. Then I looked and I found that the Aussie property, bubble, if you want to call it that or whatever, but the increase in property value was even higher by magnitude in Australia than it was anywhere else.
Mm. I always find it interesting because people talk, especially with the property side of things, they're saying in Australia we'll get a lot of immigration and that's what's helping push property prices up. A lot of people coming in, obviously increasing demand, and I've heard you comment as well, the idea, over in Japan, clearly you've got there's got to be a large demand because you've got such a huge population, or not a large demand, but the argument that it is dependent on the number of people to how much property is available. What are your thoughts on?
It all comes down to demographics first, okay? Because as they say, demographics is destiny. So as people age, they spend less. They get rid of their bigger homes. When you got kids cost a fortune to raise. I mean, I love my daughter, but she's not cheap. So kids cost a fortune and they produce nothing. So you just got to keep giving this money out and getting nothing in return from a financial aspect. You get the love and everything, obviously. But as people age, it starts to change. Like as my daughter grows up, she leaves home, then lights start getting turned off, and the power bill goes down, and the food consumption goes down, and everything else goes down. And as I age more, I start putting away money for retirement and getting rid of unnecessary debt. And this is what happened in Japan, basically, is they aged, their demographic trends turned down. And that's what's happened in the US, Europe, and Canada at the moment. Is after World War II. Sorry to jump around a bit.
No, please.
But after World War II, people came home. They were happy to see each other. They made babies. Mm. So basically, you've got the baby boom generation, which is bigger than any other generation that ever lived in history, and they're moving through that now. Of the kids have left home. Yes, some have come back because of problems, but the majority of them have left home. They've passed their peak spending years as far as spending on discretionary stuff. And they're starting to put money aside for their retirement. Mm. So as they do that, they start to sell down their bigger homes, which is a really bad thing to be doing right now. It's a really bad area because property's going down. So then there's less demand for those bigger homes because the next generation coming through is smaller. Mm. And this is what happened in Japan. That even though there's demand for property, the demand's less. Yeah. So it's not enough to raise the value of property up.
Yeah. So your feeling is it all comes back to the idea of those underlying demographics.
Yes.
And obviously the baby boom was so large and they're coming to the tail end.
Yeah.
Looking at the demographics then, how far out are we before we start to see things pick up? Like demographics, it's one of those things, it's slow.
Yeah, it is. You've got two fundamental trends at the moment. You've got demographics slowing, which is a slow lumbering sort of process, but we've also got the deleveraging where people are going, hey, we've got too much debt, we've got to get rid of it. So both sort of things happening at the moment. At the moment, demographics is taking a back seat to deleveraging.
Yeah.
So I'll get back to demographics in a second, but this is what's happening now is, $1 trillion worth of credit card debt paid back last year alone.
Yeah.
Just in places like the US, $11 trillion worth of cash in banks where people don't want to borrow because, one, I don't know if I'll have a job tomorrow, or two, I don't need the money, and three, the ones that can qualify for it don't want to take the money right now.
Is that what's pushing up the US dollar? Because that's another thing. I look at Aussie dollar to US dollar. It's just the rally has been unbelievable.
Yeah.
is that strength driven by that, or where do you see the strength driven in the US dollar at the moment?
Well, it's quite funny when you look at the headlines a couple of months ago. Retire the US dollar, find a new global or reserve currency. The US is dead, and then you see this bounce, which we said would happen, because as deleveraging happens, especially in places like the US and everywhere else where the debt is denominated in US dollars, you have to have US dollars to pay off debt.
Yeah.
How do you get US dollars? You have to sell stuff to get dollars to pay back. And every time you pay back debt, you actually retire or destroy the debt. And that makes less dollars floating around. The less dollars that are floating around, the more valuable the remaining dollars become.
Yeah. So how about the idea of happening over the next year? People, more houses defaulting, people getting worse. They're going to be wanting to recall more of the assets, so they've got money.
Yep.
And that, what's the effect going to be on the US dollar?
Well, it's going to push the US dollar up. We're expecting the US dollar to rally for at least the next couple of years. It's actually starting an upward cycle if could potentially go over the next 15 years. But at least the next 2 years, maybe I'd say five, you'd have a good strengthening US dollar.
Yeah.
Maybe the euro has potentially seen its high and it won't get as high again.
Yeah.
For the next 10, 15 years, if not more. I think commodity dollars like the Aussie, the New Zealand and the Canadian dollar are going to get hurt as the cycles turn down, like the commodity cycle turns down and things like that.
Yeah. I suppose especially as well, if that consumer demand does dry up, then obviously there's not going to be as much of a call on resources and the flow-on effect.
Yeah.
Obviously through to our...
I mean, look, the depression or this slowdown is a natural progression. You have to... last time I think I saw it was actually described as winter. And this is, if you're looking at it from a seasonal perspective, so this is like winter.
Yeah.
So, things slow down, things freeze up and things get bad for winter. But afterwards, you end up with spring. It's not the end of civilization as we know it. It's not the crumbling of the economic markets. It's not the end of the US or capitalism or anything. It's just something we have to go through to get to the next stage, where things have to deleverage, assets have to come down in value to make it more affordable for the next generation coming along.
One other thing as well that comes to mind, like we were talking about currency and things like that, and with the instability of the economy, a lot of people do resort to gold, and that's the gold. Another thing that's been rallying like at the moment.
Oh, it's fantastic.
All boats float on a rising tide, and I think anything at the moment is going up, but gold has been doing particularly well.
Well, especially when you can get US dollars borrowing for next to nothing. Well, if I can get money for next to nothing, I've got to put it somewhere. So you actually have this liquidity moving through the system, and they're going, okay, where can we put it? And everywhere they're putting it is pushing up the price. And also, when people were worried about the US dollar potentially crumbling and being the end of the US, which was kind of silly when you think about it, but people thinking about that, well, then obviously gold is the choice. It's a hedge. Because gold's great. You can survivalists can bury it in their backyard. It's fine. You can hide it in your toilet because people like to hide it in their cisterns and other places like that. And gold is gold. You can't manipulate its price as far as you can't leverage it. Gold, an ounce of gold is an ounce of gold. You can't. Whereas with the banking system and the fiat system, I give you $100. I give the bank $100, and they can lend that out to $1,000, 10 times.
Yeah. What's going to be the effect then with all of this deleveraging as well? Like, I mean, obviously, if there's less dollars floating around,
you come back to that original 100 instead of that 1,000, and that's why people have to find money to pay back that debt.
Yeah.
Which takes more money out of the system.
Which should be good for the system.
It is. Ultimately, it's good for the system.
Yeah.
But short term, there's some pain. And all the politicians have managed to do so far with the stimulus packages and everything else is delay that. I mean, the US, they said, for every dollar of stimulus we spend, it'll be at $1.8 or $1.4 in the economy. It actually turned out now, we've got the figures, it ended up at 80 cents to the dollar. Because by the time it passes through all these politicians' hands and does everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, governments are the most inefficient users of capital ever. You give it to the private sector, we go out and we make stuff with it. They don't. And I'm not anti-government, it's just the way it works.
Yeah.